Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for the high priest we have in Christ. Freedom to pray, knowing that he prays for us. And as we interact with a portion of John's Gospel this morning, we desire to be sensitive to Christ and what he or how he responded and what that communicates about him and his work today. We want to be doers of your word for your glory. For it's in Christ's name I pray. Amen. Is Jesus the Christ, the Son of God, in whom one may have eternal life in his name? Do you claim that life? Does your daily living display life in Christ? Let's turn to John chapter 5, reading together verses 1 through 5. And keep in mind in the context that in John chapter 4, Jesus had gone from Judea, he was going to Galilee, and he went through Samaria. And as he went through Samaria, he sat down by Jacob's well. And a woman from Sychar came to get some water. And we know that he had conversation with her. And that led to spending several days in town with the people of the town, and some would have believed in Christ. After 2 days in Sychar, he left there and he went to Galilee. And while in Galilee, he went to a town, Cana, where he had turned the water into wine. And while he was in Cana, a royal official came from Capernaum. And his son was dying, and he wanted his son to be healed. And we found last week that he healed his son. And that was a miracle that came, at a distance. But reading together in chapter 5 of John 1 through 15. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here is a great number of disabled people used to lie, and they waited the moving of the waters from the time an angel of the Lord would come down and stir the waters. The first one into the pool after each such disturbance would be cured of whatever disease he had. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm still trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." And once the man was cured, he picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is a Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." "But," he replied, "the man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd and that was there. Later Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. As we discuss chapter 5, and as you look at chapters 5, 6, and 7, we find that people move from mere reservation and hesitation about Jesus to outright and sometimes official opposition. And in the context here, but other places in John's Gospel, we find that the issue of the Sabbath creates conflict. Jesus healed this man on the Sabbath. And there's other times where Jesus responded on the Sabbath. And that became a Christological issue. It was an issue about Christ because the identity of Christ was at stake. Thus, there's an extended discourse concerning Jesus' relationship with the Father. In chapter 5, 19 through 47, we find that miracles evoke allegiance to Christ, but such allegiance generally cannot endure Jesus' teaching. Because in chapter 6 and verse 66, some people were following Jesus, but they turned from following him because of his hard sayings, but they had seen his miracles. The authorities in chapters 5, 6, and 7 seek to arrest Christ. And Jesus progressively reveals himself to be the obedient Son of God, the bread of life, who can give life to the world and provide thirst-quenching drink of the Spirit. Now, the narrative which we read opens with Jesus healing on the Sabbath day, and that leads into a conflict between Jesus and the authorities. John reveals that behind Jesus' signs, particularly his signs that challenge what no mortal could challenge, stands his identity. He challenges the Sabbath, and behind the Sabbath is his character, his identity. The signs therefore point to Christology. Jesus is the Father's supreme agent, and far from dishonoring the Father by claiming divine rank, Jesus is concurring with the Father's decree. From Jesus' perspective, he is not undermining the Sabbath, but challenging the Jews' interpretation of it. The purpose is not to undermine the Sabbath, but to support the high Christological in which Christ acts along with his Father. In healing on the Sabbath, he's pointing out that I am. And I yield to my Father. Observing the Sabbath was central to the legalistic Judaism of Jesus' day. The Sabbath had become a pervading theme in Jewish life. So significant was the Sabbath that a major section of the Mishnah was devoted to Sabbath rules. Sabbath obedience became, in fact, an eschatological issue because it was thought, at least minimally, that the coming of the Messiah was linked to the perfect keeping of the Sabbath. The actions of Jesus were thus regarded by Sabbath-oriented Jews as being diametrically opposed to the expectation of the rabbis. The Sabbath was a gift, not something to be legalistically kept to try to control God. But in the context, the location is in Jerusalem. It says Jesus went up to Jerusalem for the feast of the Jews, and it was near the sheep gate, a pool, where Jesus, ministers at this point in time. So what is taking place? Jesus is in Jerusalem, and it would have been at this pool where the man would go, he would lay, and he would trust to get into the water and be healed. So in terms of the city of Jerusalem, that's where Jesus is in the city, and he's there for a feast of the Jews. John repeatedly in his narrative talks about Jesus being at the feast. In chapter 2 and verse 13, he's in Jerusalem for the Passover feast. In chapter 6 and verse 4, he's there for the Passover. In chapter 7, he's there for the Feast of the Tabernacles. In chapter 10, he's there for dedication, and in chapter 11 for the Passover. But in this particular passage, he's there for a feast. No specific is given. And the custom, apparently, as you read the flow of the passage, was that they would go to the pool, those who were ill, and when an angel troubled the waters, the first one in would be healed. And apparently this man, for some time, had been there hoping to get healed. So in the context, we have an invalid who had been an invalid for 38 years. And I want you to notice the length of time. I think it's critical to understand that he has been an invalid for 38 years. And I think you know as well as I do, maybe not from experience, that someone who is an invalid, they lose physical strength, their ability to do things, there's mental struggles, and their outlook and carrying on with life. And if you ever read Johnny Erickson Tada's book, who has been paralyzed for, I think, over 50 years now, if I'm remembering correctly, she shares some of the struggles of just being paralyzed. If her muscles are to have any kind of strength, someone needs to exercise her arms, her legs. But there's an invalid of 38 years. Jesus comes along. He's creator. He's life. He's light. He's the one and only from the Father. He's full of grace and truth. And then we also have the Jews. And the Jews become more and more antagonistic toward Jesus. In verse 10, we find that the Jews respond, "It is the Sabbath day. The law forbids you to carry your mat." And because of the Sabbath day, the Jews become more antagonistic in verse 16. So because Jesus was doing these things in the Sabbath, the Jews persecuted him. And then in verse 18, for this reason the Jews tried all the harder to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So it is in this setting that Jesus in verse 6 sees the man lying there and learns that he has been in this condition for a long time, and earlier it was 38 years. And he poses a question. Do you want to get well? Jesus takes the initiative like his Father so often took the initiative in reaching out to people, ministering to people. Jesus reached out to the woman at the well, the 12 in Matthew 4. He reached out to Levi in Mark chapter 2. He reached out to the man with a shriveled hand in Mark 3. He went from village to village in Mark 6. Jesus had a pattern of reaching out. And as he reached out, he used questions as his Father did. Jesus used a question in healing and forgiveness of the paralytic in Mark chapter 2. He asked the teachers of the law some questions. In the context of fasting, he posed some questions. In Mark 2 with the Sabbath, a different situation with the Sabbath, he asked the Pharisees some questions. The man with the shriveled hand in Mark 3, he posed some questions. The accusation in Mark chapter 3, teachers of the law, he posed some questions. And in the storm in Mark 4, he asked questions. One of the things that Jesus did quite repeatedly, and in this context, the question is, do you want to get well? The man responds, Sir, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes ahead of me. So it's obvious that the man wanted to be healed. So what does Jesus do? He commands him in verse 8, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. Now think about a man being an invalid for 38 years, being told, pick up your mat and walk. Think about Johnny Erickson Tada being told, get up, walk. We're dealing with a miracle that is big. It's huge. And the invalid obeys. There's a total, complete healing. And Jesus, in his healings, always healed completely. And there's only one miracle that he did in terms of healing that was two-stage. The rest were immediate. And we find that the healing takes place in the Sabbath day. Verse 9, the day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And Jesus again seemed to find it interesting in dealing with the Sabbath. In Matthew chapter 12. Jesus is going through the grain fields and his disciples are picking some grain. And it was on a Sabbath day, and that got him into some trouble. In Luke chapter 13, he heals a crippled woman. And again, that was on the Sabbath day, and that created some friction. He's in a Pharisee's house on Luke 14, and a healing takes place. And that created, again, some friction. In John 9, the healing of the man born blind, again, on the Sabbath, and that created some friction. Jesus seems to get into trouble quite frequently over the Sabbath. So the Jews, it's the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat. Apparently they were policing. They were observing. Later, rabbis meticulously detailed a fence around the Sabbath. Most Jewish people allowed some exceptions, especially for saving life. After Syrian's troops slaughtered 1,000 Israelites who refused to defend themselves on the Sabbath, according to 1 Maccabees 2, 34 through 38, most Jewish priests contended that the law would permit defense or defensive warfare on the Sabbath. But any activity that could be done before the Sabbath was prohibited on the Sabbath. Although matters of life and death remained exceptions, and common people were probably less particular, the Pharisees opposed minor medical cures on the Sabbath. By Old Testament standards, it is clear the healed man was breaking the law, since he did not normally carry mats around for a living, according to the tradition of the elders. The man was breaking the law since he was breaking one of the 39 categories of work to which the law was understood to refer. Again, all kinds of stipulations that added to the giving of the Sabbath in the Old Testament. And in this context, it's still not Jesus who is acknowledged as the one who healed, so they're confronting the man who was healed. The Jews are indignant. And I want us to step back for a minute and think about it, something, in terms of living today. Sometimes we like rules. We want everything to be spelled out in detail so that we know if we're keeping the rule. And Jesus said, keep the Sabbath. The Jews were to be doing that. But as you read the Old Testament, you read the New Testament, there's much freedom being given. But just as the Pharisees had all kinds of narrow rules added to the Mosaic law concerning the Sabbath. We today sometimes like to have all kinds of rules spelled out. And that gets us in trouble. Spent 4 years at a school that had a fair number of rules spelled out. And that created some trouble for me. Created some trouble for Ruth Ann. But you could take pride if you kept the rule. I kept this rule, I kept this rule, I kept this rule, I kept the next rule. So one of the rules was the girl's skirt had to be at least, I think, to the middle of the knee. Am I correct? And Ruth Ann went out of chapel one day and they just announced there's a skirt check today. And the checker said to Ruth Ann, your skirt's too short. Go to the dean of women. And I think the dean of women sent her to the dean of students. And the dean of students says, well, were you carrying your books, kind of against your body? And she said, yeah. He said, that's probably what happened. Don't worry about it. But there was a rule added to. I went out of chapel one day. They said, there's a hair check today. And the checker said, your hair's a little long, and I think it was in the back. Go to the dean of men. I went to the dean of men, and see, it creates conniving. So I went to the dean of men, and I said, I was told my hair is too long. I didn't say where. I just said my hair. Well, he said it's a little bit long in the front. He didn't say anything about the back. So what did I do? He said, get it cut. And that was the end of it. We add, and that's what the Pharisees, teachers of the law, had been doing. So they confront the man. Who is this fellow who told you to pick up your mat and walk? The man answers. The man who healed me had no idea, or the man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd. It seems the Jews were more concerned about a breach of their law than the healing that took place. And that can happen. And Jesus says to the Pharisees and teachers in John 9 that you're so concerned with keeping the detail of things that you have made up that you don't even see your own sin. We find that later in verse 14, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, see, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. Now, when Jesus says to the man, see, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you. Just reflect on that briefly. Some tragedies are the outcome of specific sins. We know in Acts 5, Ananias and Sapphira died. In 1 Corinthians 12, it probably should be 11, some of the Corinthians had died because of the abuse of the Lord's Supper. In 1 John 5 and verse 16, John talks about a sin unto death. This does not mean that everyone who commits these sins will inevitably fall ill or die. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen. As you look at the text and take some time with it, means the bad things that had happened was occasioned by the sin, which a person must not repeat. Again, as I've read a number of writers on it, it is believed that the man had committed some sin, resulted in him being an invalid, And when Jesus says, stop sinning, it would have been tied in with something that he had done, or something worse may happen to you. He's telling him, stop. In Luke 13, we won't turn there, but in Luke 13, we find that some people were saying, well, certain people died in the tower. There's others who are going through difficulty. We must be better than them. Beware of looking at others and saying, well, I never went through what they did. They must have done something. Suffering and tragedy are the result of the fall. In this sense, all sickness is the result of sin, but not necessarily some specific sin or individual sin. That's a general statement, but in this context, it seems like the man had done something. And Jesus is saying, stop sinning. Let something worse happen to you. What's the value of this passage of Scripture? The account, again, points to what John says in John 20. I've written these things to you so that you may know that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, in whose name there is life. He's already stated Jesus is creator, he is life, he is light. He's the one who reveals the Father. He says, here's another evidence that Jesus is who I claim he is. He's the Christ, the Son of the living God. We wrap it up a couple of thoughts in terms of application. Notice hurting people. God may be working in them. Jesus repeatedly noticed people. They were hurting. We may not be able to heal someone physically, which we can't. But as God brings hurting people into our life, we can reach out to them with concern. Enjoy the freedom. Don't add to it. Do we want a standard so we can bring about or brag about how well we're doing? Some of the jobs that you may have been on, or maybe some of the teachers that you have or are experiencing, some may give you great freedom, and other people spell everything out in nitty-gritty detail. God basically gives a lot of freedom. But the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, had added to, and it created a lot of conflict. Enjoy freedom. Third, not coming up for me, but be slow, very slow to draw conclusions as to why others may suffer or go through a hardship. Jesus had that right to do that, but we don't. Then fourth, how often are we concerned about being right to the point of missing God working? We've come through COVID. And because some people wanted to be right about the reasons behind COVID, or how we should respond to government, that we argued our point to the nth degree and alienated people, rather than seeing someone that may be struggling, fearful, when they argue their point fairly strong. Economic issues. We can be so passionate about pointing or pushing our point of view that we miss the hurt that the person is carrying. That's what the Jews did here. They missed the greatness of the healing. Here's a guy who's been infant for 38 years. And they're concerned about his carrying a mat. And they make that the issue. This passage confirms Jesus is who John claims. His creator, his life, his light, he came from the Father. He's full of grace and truth. And in light of that, that impacts how we live every day. Christ is actively at work today. Many of us are not bitter, but maturing in trials. I could go around and say, yeah, here's so-and-so going through a trial, here's so-and-so. They're not angry and they're not bitter. That's evidence that Jesus is who John says he is. You go to work and you work hard, consistently in your job for God's glory, day in and day out. Evidence Christ is who John says he is. Some of us along the way seek forgiveness or offer forgiveness, evidence of Christ being who John says he is. Some of you are obeying mom and dad willingly, freely, evidence of Christ being who he claims he is at work in your lives. There are those in our midst who are humble in their blessings. They accept them, not becoming braggadocious in the midst of them. There are those in our midst who admit sin and disobedience and go to God. Again, evidence that Christ is who John says he is. The one who can heal an invalid man, being an invalid for 38 years, is the one who works in our lives today. And it's evidenced week by week. And we want to reflect on that Christ as we partake of communion. Remember, communion is a time to remember. We reflect back on Christ and what he has done. His coming to this earth, his living here, his death, his resurrection, his ascension, his being seen. We reflect also on the present, in the sense that we have relationships with other people. And they're to display a Christ-likeness. But also reflect in the future, because Jesus said, until we partake again, and he's referring to the future. So I ask the men to come forward, and we'll pray together, serve communion, and then after communion we'll sing a song.